the recording here first, and then I'll share the screen. I get the right here. So hopefully you can see this table, and
yes, sir.
And David, I hope you're back. You've done a great job here in starting to analyze these tasks and if they can be how big they are and if they are if they can be made easier.
Yeah, before you get started, Magnus,
Mm-hmm.
so just because there's probably quite a few people on the call that haven't been involved in this process. So just to give you a little background.
Thank you.
This came out, this originated with, Magnus's call to arms, so to speak, in Seattle last November. And we decided it would be a good idea to do a walkthrough of all the release management tasks. And so this has been going on in the PTL meeting. So a lot of the comments and notes that you see are based on feedback from PTLs in the two PTL meetings where we were doing review. And also, I think we made it through roughly halfway through the table. So we still have about half of it to review with the PTLs.
Right. I suggest that we start from number one. We don't have to go very deeply into the ones that has been looked at, but and I would like to see if there sort of how can we make this simpler, and is there a big change compared to the alternative release process? So we say review code coverage goals versus actuals. Well, in this, there was a suggestion here from Michael that task should be done later in the release since the code changes significantly after M1. So that is sort of difficult to know what test coverage you have already at this point. So I think that's pretty clear.
I think that might be based on a misunderstanding of the task, maybe, because there's another task further on that says, close the whatever gaps that you have in your goal versus actuals, close that. And so this one is just merely to take a look at the current state. Where are we at and where do we need to go? What are the gaps? But there's a comment in the second task that basically, in fact, I think it was you, Magnus, who said that it was a little bit patronizing to have this task because we should trust our PTLs to know that they need to do this. So just the second task is sufficient.
Yeah, right. So maybe the comment should be this task, it can be done sort of later in the release together with the already acknowledged task.
Yeah, or we can just assume that our PTLs are aware of this and don't need to be reminded. So
right. Okay. And that would be, I mean, the same kind of, it's not difference between the two processes, I guess, although you could think of the M1 here being maybe a milestone in the use case project. The use cases would then act as a kind of project, and they would then have a similar kind of exercise with the components. And but that's yeah. Number two, it's a there was a comment saying that, yeah, maintaining a record of FOSS used in the project. As a comment from Tuan saying that Vijay, that there is now an SBOM requirement. So this is probably not then needed. We come to number 3, request an architectural subcommittee review. I think this is still valid. I think that those reviews have been very valuable. And I think that in the alternative process, you would also have that. That would be seen as a global requirement, or maybe a best practice, that you have the architecture cleared out. So the PTLs have to show that how the architecture of the component looks like, and you will also, in this componentization, you would have extra requirements on changing the architecture in accordance with that. I don't know, Byung, if you have, or Shakar, if you're online, if you have a comment on, would it be very different, or?
No, it's not very different, just enhancing certain point, make sure it's comparable, and then, so we are in the process to working with it. So.
And then there was a comment from Liam saying that this task is rather simple. It's valued as small, but requires follow-up. So that there's kind of maybe admin issue here that we can look at. We don't have to look into that now. So there was also Vijay saying that the architecture subcommittee should create ticket with subtasks for each project. And that's a suggestion. And we can.
The idea there was, I think what Vijay was saying is that instead of the architectural subcommittee waiting for the projects, the PTLs to reach out and request a review, that Vijay would just, or I mean, I'm sorry, that Shakar, the architectural subcommittee, would just automatically, send invitations to the create tickets and say, hey, come in for your architectural review. So that cuts out one step in the process.
Right, and then that would help. I mean, it would help the PTLs to have one less thing to think about.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Number 4, document API issues in the requirement description, and this is of course important, and that should be. And Liam talked about that before, that you keep your API and you have to be very clear on if you're changing it, and especially if you're changing so that it's not backwards compatible. That's a classic, of course, in software development. So so that wouldn't be any difference. You would have that kind of, the point of time is another issue, but you would have that sort of requirement on the components, on the PTLs, to make sure that this is well known, and that in this case individual users or use cases would get the sort of report on any changes here.
So Magnus,
Yeah.
on that end, Shakar and I talked last year,
Yeah,
to improve the architecture review template.
okay.
So some of this stuff, new API, new data elements, or any security requirements are now laid out. That will help PTL when they go for review to put something in there. If it doesn't matter, right? Not applicable.
Right. No, I think that's a very good idea. Having a template, having a process, it helps a lot in in sort of saving time, not having to start sort of with the white paper and come up with that. So very good, and that could be a task for the ArcCom to make sure that is documented, the APIs.
Yeah, so the template is updated so PTL can take a look.
Yeah.
And I think we didn't go too much into details as much as I wanted to, but wanted to make it at least to some abstraction where it helps PTL to think about those aspects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. Then we have the docs create documentation tracking page and pre-fill information. I think this would then be a task in the, yeah, this is extra small. This is just making kind of a stub for this. But I think this would be part of the responsibilities for the PTL in an alternative process. Yeah.
This particular one, as you can see in the note there, this does not get applied to all the projects. This is for the docs project only.
Aha, sorry. Yeah, I missed that. Sure. That's even smaller. It's a one task.
Right.
Okay. Sorry about that. We can move on. And then I mean, you can think about how you in the alternative process, how you handle, then maybe the docs project would be a kind of a global requirement for documentation, and would be then a more of a subcommittee than a project. I don't know. We could discuss that.
Yeah, we could have a whole 2-hour meeting about that unto itself, about how the proposal to move to component releases impacts the documentation. Yeah.
No, there of course there's a potential threat to that you miss out on the conformance and documentation and so on. So that's something that has to be looked at. When it comes to number 6 here, complete release planning templates. It provides visibility to the TC and community into the activity planned. I don't think we had comments on that.
Yeah, my takeaway from this was that the PTLs continue to believe. In fact, I think it was maybe Tuan or someone else made the comment that they felt like this was maybe even the most important release management task in the entire release process. But one possible gain here is to go into the document and simplify it.
Mm-hmm. Right, and if you don't have a release, you in the alternative case, you would then be working with the use cases for the same purpose. And 7, verify information in documentation tracking page. It's an extra small one. And there was a comment that this might be too soon in the process.
And this is one that was created at the request of the docs team, because they wanted to get because they were having difficulty tracking, what documentation was relevant for the release. And so they wanted to have a handshake with the PTLs where it's like, okay, we have this table with this information. Is this correct? Is this what we're going to release?
Yeah, no, I think for the alternative process, you would, as you said, you would have to think about this carefully, how you run this if the documentation project doesn't have sort of a support from the platform, from the release. It has to be done and secured in another way, but it's a task that has to be done anyway. Okay, we're coming to 8. Update documented risks, highlight technical resource, schedule risks to the release for each project. And this is, of course, if you have a centralized planning, this is what you normally do in a project, that you early on have a go at how the resources are. And this, it's a t-shirt size here is extra small. I don't know, it could be big, of course, if you want to rectify, if you want to make sure that you have resources. But this is one of the difficulties that the new process is trying to tackle, that that you it's not central, yeah. And then we said, I mean, you had sort of redundant to other sources of information. Maybe it's unnecessary to have that.
Yeah, and remember, going back to your comment about the t-shirt size, that this is just documenting the risks, not necessarily resolving the risks.
Yeah, so. Not mitigating. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can say you have a risk, and then you move on. And as I said here in the comment, that you may expect someone to act on that. And since this document is seldom reviewed in the TEC, then maybe you get false hopes that someone will help you.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Just another general comment to the folks on the call that are listening. You might think it's kind of odd that as release manager, I seem a little unsure about some of these tasks. The reason for that is that I inherited a lot of these tasks. When I started as release manager about 3.5 years ago, probably about 2/3 of these tasks existed already, and so they've just been carried forward. So some of these, were proposed and put in place, probably 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, you don't have all the history in it. It might be there for a reason that is no longer there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at number 9. Review license scan issues. Yeah. And we all agree that license scan is necessary. I guess this is pretty automated, right?
Yeah, exactly. There was some confusion, and this was something that I was not aware of. I didn't realize, because I thought Nexus IQ was primarily focused on code quality, but apparently it also does license scans. And I had a chance to talk with a couple people in IT about this, and the feedback that I received is that well, the first thing is that fussology, which is the thing that Jeff, Casey, help me out. What's Jeff's last name? Jeff Shapiro, yeah. Jeff Shapiro, the reports that he sends out on license scans are based on fussology. And it turns out that that is a standard for the Linux Foundation legal team.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, so what I was a little concerned about was, are we paying, is the project paying something extra to have the license scan capability in Nexus IQ? And it turns out that we are not. But the advice I received was basically Fossology is a better scan. It does things that Nexus IQ is not capable of, and so my conclusion is there's no waste, there's no cost benefit that we're missing, and B, we should basically ignore the license scan information from Nexus IQ and rely on the Fossology reports from Jeff Shapiro.
So. Yeah, there's a subtle difference here too. The license scan that Jeff does is doing license scans on the ONAP software base, whereas Nexus IQ is mostly focusing on dependencies.
Okay, that's a good point. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, that's good to know.
So I mean, so when you get the license scan from Jeff, it's actually making sure that, say, you haven't, say, pasted in something from the internet with some license that's, a GPL license from whatever company. Yeah, not that anybody would do that, but you know what I mean. It's just
Can we note your comment here, Liam? What did you say?
Yeah, both are required. Nexus IQ then is useful, not so much for licenses. Well, I mean, it can be quicker because if you see something that that you've used a dependency that has a GPL license or whatever, it can be handled. But it's much more useful for security fixes. For seeing what's the latest version of Hibernate that removes this security issue that is in the one that I'm currently using. But you need both. Yeah.
Is this right? It's useful for external dependencies.
Yes.
Okay.
So the one from the Fossology one is making sure that your code base is okay. Contradict me if I'm wrong, everybody else that's on the call, but that's my take on it.
So Liam, there was another thing that I never closed the check on it, was because Fossology is a contractor to Linux Foundation. Was there anything more than bill of material that they were producing for licensing?
They also do a scan of the code base to make sure that there's no licenses that are not recognized. I mean, make sure that all of your code has, say, Apache 2 or a BSD, especially for stuff in the JavaScript where you have to copy in source code. It's useful for that. So you do need both, yeah.
So I was wondering if they're doing any kind of reporting or legal review of the licenses, or is it really an automated function that they just?
Well, what it does is Nexus IQ is automated to the extent that it produces the reports, and then you can go through them yourself. The other one is the same. I mean, once a month it sends you a spreadsheet, and you check your table in the spreadsheet, worksheet in the spreadsheet to make sure that there's nothing untoward in there. If there is, then you have to fix it.
Jeff,
it's very seldom that there's any. I don't think I've ever had to change anything, but it's still reassuring to know that it's done.
Yeah, and Jeff helps by he provides a narrative on top of the reports, calling out what the most significant issues are. And it's true that we don't have problems very often, but roughly maybe, I don't know, once a year or so something pops up.
No, I mean, this is, but I mean, this is I mean, the Nexus IQ is this is just something that you have to do, and both of these are just something you have to do as a developer. One of them isn't unique here. I'm sure other companies, all companies have, or most companies have similar processes. I know we have some.
Yeah, good. Let's move on. I think we're in agreement here. Then when it comes to 10, data models shared with modeling subcommittee. David, you were supposed to follow up with the modeling subcommittee. Is there anyone from the modeling subcommittee in the call now?
Yeah, and I have not had a chance to do that yet.
No, of course.
So
yeah.
Still an open action for me.
But since it's unclear, it's something to find out. 11, complete architectural subcommittee review. And we talked about this sort of to assign tickets at M1.
So this is the other side of the one that we talked about up front, right?
Right.
And so the suggestion was, keep this one and get rid of the earlier one.
Yeah. Right.
Good. Okay.
And then 12, color code impact view per component page. And this is to ensure that the PTLs complete the handshake with requirement owners.
Right.
So this is, of course, important, but if you have a more self-sustained or independent components, they would have to understand which their stakeholders are. And each PTL has to have sort of a list of stakeholders and make sure that, or the stakeholders make sure that there is a handshake.
Right.
So this is potentially large effort, of course, and key effort. And this is a good way of having a very short view. You get a quick view of if something is up or something is wrong. So that's of course a benefit of this.
Yeah, and for the people on the call that aren't familiar with this, what we have requirements, we have requirement owners, and then we have projects. So it forms a matrix. And so the requirement owners express their needs in this table by putting an X next in the cell in the matrix for each project that they believe will be affected by the requirement that requires changes, and then the projects then express their ability to support or not support by color coding that cell. So they go in, and if it's green, yes, we can do this. If it's red, no, we cannot. And the hope there is that there's more going on than just this table. We're trying to create a dialogue between the requirement owners and the projects, and a negotiation, hopefully. So the table, documents the requirements and the outcomes and what can be supported, but behind the scenes, we're hoping that there's a conversation going on between the requirement owners and the projects.
Right. And then there is you can think about whether we have to think about this requirement owners. I've said this before. I think you should sort of put a demand on the requirement owners to get engaged. So in the alternative process, you would have only requirements that are acknowledged by the PTL from sort of from its stakeholders, and for the team's stakeholders or the component stakeholders, and that would be sort of at the integrity of the PTL, because I mean the team is sort of responsible for the resources, and that is sort of nothing. No one can sort of tell the team that you have to do this and that. And I think then the use cases would then have associated requirements. So I would prefer that you don't have sort of single requirement owners that are part of the process, but it's delegated to the PTLs to keep track of that, and that you as a use case owner then has to put up this kind of table where you identify which components you are depending on, and then sort of make an active comparison or an active tracking here on how well those requirements are fulfilled in the components. Okay, moving on to 13. Communicate the API changes to other projects. Yes, we know that this is absolutely necessary, and that should be the responsibility for the projects or the components. 14, verify that test coverage goals have been met. Yeah, and then we say, and there was the patronizing, maybe it's a bit too much, but that this task could remain then, and the former task is not necessary. And then it's also a question of whether the TC has to have some visibility into compliance with code coverage. So then you can think about what is the role of the TC. If we delegate more of the responsibility to the components, then you have to trust that is ongoing, and also the ONAP the TSC doesn't really, let's say, promise anything as a result of that model. 15, resolve all global requirements impacts. Yeah, and then Amy had a comment on JIRA tickets are effective in encouraging compliance with global requirements. But I'm clear that this task adds anything. I don't know, Amy, are you in this meeting? No, I don't see Amy. David, do you have an understanding of what was discussed here?
Yeah, because most of the global requirements are related to things that SecCom is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And for those requirements, SecCom actually generates tasks for each of the projects. So they identify the tasks that are affected by a particular global requirement, related to security, and then we track those. They're set up as subtasks to the REQ. So if you pull up the REQ JIRA for the global requirement, then you can see all of the subtasks assigned to the affected projects. And so we could track the status of the global requirement that way. And so what Amy was saying was that those JIRAs are a reminder by themselves to the the projects that they've got tasks that they need to get done. And so this task, it's just kind of redundant, basically.
Doesn't necessarily have to be a milestone task. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That was from Amy's point of view, anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Now we're going into items that we haven't looked at before. 16, verify that there are no merge requests older than 36 hours.
Yeah, I was trying to pull up some email. I think maybe it was from Tuan, he reached out to me. I think it was back in like November or December, and with a comment, I don't understand why we do this. I don't think it's necessary. And I was trying to find that comment and I couldn't dig it up. And of course, I don't think he's on the call today, so we can't get his input on that.
No, I saw him before today, but maybe he managed.
I think it was Tuan, but I can't remember for sure. Yeah.
Okay, I can add a comment here. Tuan comment question mark.
I suppose I can contribute there. Probably was Tuan. He mentions it every release. That he kind of just keeps that task open, and he kind of comments on it. He doesn't really get why we still have it. Yeah, so just to.
Okay. For some reason, some windows blocking my. I can't turn this into red, but I'll make it italic. And so, well, to get back to this, and we don't know the T-shirt size here. 17 resolve highest priority JIRA issues at M3. Then if we don't do this, the high priority issue would remain unsolved until the end of the release, and thereby creating schedule risk. Is there any evidence that we actually that this is helping in taking the problems earlier?
This is another one of those tasks that we've had since I started, and that's been carried along. So there's never been a time when we didn't have this task as part of the release process. So I can't really say, what the alternative would be like.
But from your experience, did we catch a lot here by this task?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think that we do. They don't necessarily all get resolved. So what happens is that we have some particular sticky issues that can't get resolved, and so typically an exception gets generated for those. I guess it highlights the issue. It says, hey, TSC. We have a high priority JIRA issue in this release that was unable to be fixed at this point or something, which is kind of a signal that we could have a problem with the schedule risk toward the end of the release.
John Keeney raised a hand. Please, John.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's not perfectly reasonable to have high priority JIRA issues still open during this snapshot. If this release is going to be a snapshot of current readiness, I think it's still reasonable to have tickets open. They might not be getting addressed as part of the release, but it could be happening in other branches, could be happening separate from the release stream.
Yeah, I think this stems from a project management that you would have maybe within a company or so, that you would say that here are some high risk priority JIRAs, and then you would, in the steering group, you would bring that up, or the project manager would say, oh, I need to get more resources into this. I need to solve this. This is a risk for the project and so on. But I mean, actually, we don't have a centralized resource pool. So it's difficult to know what to do. You can highlight it, of course. You can pick on the people that are not doing this. But I tend to agree with you, John. It's not evident that you have to resolve them early on. David, is this specific projects or is it specific tasks, specific JIRAs? Is it like security or anything that is typically sort of targeted here?
No, it's literally any project that has a JIRA issue identified with high or highest priority. I mean, you know, if you're going to take a cynical look at this, you could say that this task encourages projects to underrate the JIRA issues so that they don't have to deal with this, you know. So that's another way to look at it. So, you know, the possibilities here are that you could remove it altogether, but you see my note down there under intent background that it's repeated twice. Another way to deal with this might be to say, well, we're not going to do this twice. We're just going to do it once at a particular milestone and call it good. Or you could say we're not going to do it at all.
Right.
Also worth noting here, sorry, Magnus, the JIRA ticket can be created by anybody, and the priority set on it is just the opinion of the person who created the ticket. That might not rank well with the priority of other tickets in the project. The ranking might not be the same of the person who wrote the ticket as the people who are actually contributing to that project.
That's true. That's a good point.
No, sorry. Bit of a cold here on my side. Good that we are not in a face-to-face meeting. Okay. Okay, let's move on. 18, start OOM review with updates. Sorry, with updated container image. In a more decentralized process, you would refer this task to the either the stakeholders of the components or the use case owner, I guess. So it's about coordination. This is for coordinating the whole release, the whole platform. Or am I wrong here?
No, I think that's right. And I think that this came out of when we because when we changed the release process a couple of years ago, we had dropped down to just 3 milestones followed by a release candidate. And at some point, Dan and some of the other PTLs pointed out that we needed to have this separation between the time that we finish coding and we actually deliver an updated image to OOM and integration, because previously they were kind of on top of each other. And the fact is that there's some work involved in making that happen. And so then we added M4 and created that separation. And so that resulted in having, and I think that this task was maybe created then, but I can't remember for sure. But that came out of that division, splitting up what was happening at M3 and adding another milestone, M4.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, to avoid surprises. 19, assign JIRA issues to the release. Can you explain a bit, David?
Sure. Yeah. So this is basically to maintain JIRA hygiene and to make sure that we, in JIRA, we have an accurate understanding of what the work is for the particular release. Because what can happen is that we have tasks that or issues that have no assignment at all, or are still assigned to an old release, or things like that. So that that means that we have kind of a shadow inventory of work, and the work that what we see assigned to say the London release doesn't represent all of the work, because there's stuff that is not assigned to a release at all, or is assigned to an old release or something like that. So the idea here is, and particularly I believe this refers back to the project release plan, to make sure that the work that you've defined in the release plan and any bugs that you're working on, et cetera, are all assigned to the current release.
Yeah,
so
but
it's basically for transparency.
But David, this is for all milestones, right? You don't necessarily do this only at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you could have this assigned to a different milestone, but it basically at some point you do an assessment of the. I think the idea is that at this point you're far enough along to know what it is that you're working on, and to make sure that it's all accurately assigned to the correct release. But it could potentially be at a different point.
Is it? Couldn't you demand that each JIRA has to have a release, or is it sort of that there is something that we need to do, and then you realize that maybe not this release, we'll have to do it next release, and this is where you decide on that?
Yeah, and the problem with not having JIRA issues assigned to a release is that it makes it unclear whether the issue is just stale and it's never going to be resolved, or if someone's actively working on it, et cetera. So if it's affirmatively assigned to a specific release, then that gives us a clearer idea of what the workload is for that release.
Or in the template, you could demand that you put the release. You don't accept any JIRAs without a release. And then at this point, you would look at it and say, nah, we can't take this in this release, we push it. But that's just a technicality, of course.
Yeah, and the problem is there is enforcement, because then someone, I suppose me, has to go through 24 release plans, look at all the JIRAs, and ensure that they're all assigned to the London release or whatever. So,
but I mean,
I'm lazy. I try to do as little work as possible.
And all this sort of, many of these tasks has a sense of control, has a sense of sort of I need to check whether we are really we will deliver on what we said we would deliver, and of course there's nothing wrong with that, but in general, but in the in the case here where we don't have sort of someone who is has the authority and the responsibility central, you get to a point where it's difficult to really have this control. So
I don't think it's just the control, Magnus. It's really recording the clarity, right?
Okay.
What the workload is. I don't think it's meant to enforce the control. I think it's just from a quality perspective. You say what you're going to do.
Okay, it's a sanity check, if you will. That you're on target. Yeah.
Yeah. The sometimes there's a misunderstanding about issue tracking. A lot of, particularly if you talk to developers, a lot of developers look at, Jira or other issue tracking tools as like their personal to-do list. And why are you telling me what to do with my personal to-do list? Well, the problem is that Jira is really a project management tool. And it's a tool that enables project managers and entities like the TSC to see what's going on across the entire project. But if we don't do things like, hey, let's make sure that, all the work that we've documented in Jira is assigned to the proper release, then that project management function gets broken and it basically devolves into merely a to-do list for individual developers.
Yeah, in that sense, it is kind of a control because you expect to be able to resolve all the Jiras.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, it's a rolling process. So at the end of the release, we say, okay, whatever you weren't able to do, update the, either close it and say, this isn't going to happen, or assign it to the, to a future release, the next release or the one after that or whatever.
No, I wasn't very clear there. Resolved, I mean that you either do it or you postpone it.
Yeah, or just say it's not going to happen at all. Won't do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. 20, complete preliminary documentation. And this is a reminder, of course, because we know that documentation is not always the top priority, which means that you have to have some kind of management by shame or something, that where you show that that you have to preliminary for new projects or new documents to avoid confusion. Yeah.
Right, and the idea here is that because people that are new to the project, the tool chain, they might be unfamiliar with the documentation tool chain, and well, where do I put my files and how do they need to be configured, and et cetera, et cetera. And what you want to do is be figuring that stuff out earlier in the release, not when you're trying to get the release out the door at the very end. And so this is attempting to force those considerations to happen earlier on instead of at the end of the release. And like the note says, it's primarily for new projects or new documents.
Right. And again, in an alternative process, you would have to think about how you track these documents. Then we had a conversation whether how much documentation you can expect from an open source project, and we did talk about saying that you could, by having access to the people that have written the code, it might be too much of a burden to demand that you have a full-fledged documentation of the code, or if you also you would have to ask people to look into the source code and be familiar with that. and because I mean we have in I think all the releases said that documentation is not good enough. We should do more documentation, and we have worn out a couple of documentation PTLs. So you could think about what the bar here, what's an acceptable level of documentation. And I think also that if you think about it, when you want to solve a problem in your company or elsewhere, and you can go in and read the manual, or you can ask someone who knows. And sometimes sort of it's much more efficient to have access to the right person to help you than trying to dig through all the documentation.
Well, and the other thing too is, the age-old open source solution to everything, right? Is that, when people say, well, I couldn't find this and this and this, but I eventually figured it out, then what would be good is for those end users then to go back and take that experience and knowledge and say, yeah, someone else might need this down the road, so I'm going to contribute to the, what I've learned to the documentation. Not that I'm looking at you, Maggie.
I'd like to make some comments on the documentation piece. Yeah. So I sort of tend to agree. If you want to make a technical contribution to a particular sub-project, right? It's about getting into the source code and just reading that, right? And then and then maybe reaching out to different development teams. I think the reaching out part, at least from my experience, has been sort of hit or miss. So initially it's like, who do I reach out to? I've had some experiences where, there's a Slack. Let me post something on the Slack. And then there's no response on the Slack. So getting linked up to the right person is not clear initially. I mean, knowing what I know now is, okay, I'll just attend the project team meeting and I'll ask my questions there. And that seems to be the best way, but understanding sort of those unwritten rules about how to maneuver within the community is take some time to figure out.
Maybe we should then put a demand on having that sort of those channels visualized rather than having the full documentation. And I think that's, I mean, it's as usual. There are the two kinds of information: the information you have and the information on where to get the information. So in this case, I mean, you could say that sometimes the documentation doesn't have to be full, but there should be a link or some kind of lead to where you can find out more.
Yeah, and I think another point, I'm going to throw a topic out that should, I think, deserve further thought and discussion from the group, is the comment about contributing back to documentation. And so as it stands now, if I want to contribute back documentation to docs.onap.org, which I consider the sort of the authoritative source of documentation, there's a lot of barriers in place for me to do that, as opposed to if it was something that was editable. And so getting that sort of content in there. And then a third observation would be in terms of the documentation itself. I've found sort of what's in docs to understand some of the mechanics of projects itself to be useful. And actually, it's sort of like, understanding repos to actual containers. Some projects have nice tables that make that that easy as opposed to reading Docker files. But it always seemed to sort of, the documentation I was really looking for that I could never find is, how do I actually get something up and going so I can start playing with it? And that's sort of, I think that maybe not a documentation topic, but I think it leads in, it's an aspect of a bigger goal that even you had stated, Magnus, of, how do we, as we sort of go into this different model, how do we get something where someone can just stand up a toy environment so they can start playing with it? And I made a comment earlier, as a non-telecom, being part of a non-telecom company, trying to make technical contributions in ONAP, that barrier to entry has just been overwhelming.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of feedback on you're not alone at all. I mean, this is one of the most common feedback. So I called it starter kit here. Maybe we can elaborate on that.
Cookbook, recipes. Maggie talked about that in her presentation also, and Maggie made several references to, I think, the firewall example about how it was very well done, and she wished that there were more examples like that one.
So I think, going back to Magnus's original comment, what is the bar, right? To me, the bar really starts from when you introduce a new feature, and that will be in your architectural review when you're trying to plan the features. We also updated a section, what documentation will be required. For example, if you're introducing a new interface, are there any human involvement, like configuration or configuration update or default settings? I think at the minimum, install and configuration instructions should be included, and that should be planned from the architecture review timeframe. Identify what needs to be part of the documentation. If the humans are not involved, right, the configuration will be preset by the software developer, then there's no reason to put a whole lot of documentation. But if you are introducing some new way of installing, or the configuration item that has ranges that you can choose from, I think that at least is the minimum bar.
Right. Yeah. We're out of time here. I have to stop, not sort of taking time from the next presentation. Thank you for contributing to this discussion. We will continue going through this list. In the PTL meetings, you see there are 33 items, and also act on them. So I will stop the recording here.